you for coming here. My name is Pulido with the Belmar Public Library, and we're here for Author Time with author-poet Christopher Bogart as he comes and talks about his book, This Conversation over here. Now, Chris is a retired educator and a working poet and writer with a BS in Liberal Arts from St. Peter's College and University, a Master of Arts and a Master of Fine Arts, if I'm correctly, in creative writing from Monmouth University. He is the founder and member of Jersey Shore Poets and organizes an annual public poetry reading for National Poetry Month, Poets Live, and has been presented it for 9 years at the Eatontown Library, Monmouth County Library, Eastern Branch, and online. So, as a published writer, his music and concert reviews have appeared in Backstage Pass, and his review of the first book of poetry by Natalie Diaz, Where My Brother Was an Aztec, was published in Pulido's Journal in winter 2014. So everyone, I want to give a warm welcome to author-poet Christopher Bogart.
Sure, he's on wheels. First of all, Louis and I were talking yesterday, and one of the things we mentioned was something that I really loved to do when I was younger, and that's show and tell. So I'm going to start by giving you a little show and tell. This is the book. All right? It's a full book of poetry, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Sorry. This is the book as I wrote it, draft after draft. Each poem in the book is a number of different drafts, all the background information. So far, the books that I've written are, by the way, if you want to see this later on, I'll put it up. I do an exhaustive amount of research because I have to make sure I get it right. And the project I'm working on right now is a book of poetry in Ukraine. So I've been watching hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews with Russian soldiers, Ukrainian victims. So at any event, what I wanted to do is to start off, and please don't be insulted, but I'm going to read. And the reason why I want to do that is because that thing that I wrote, is going to give you a really good framework. And the best way to do it rather than winging it, because there's at least one person in the room that knows once I start talking I won't stop, is in this book, in his book, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, Emmanuel Acho, former linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles, writes that people of color have talked about systemic racism in this country for a long time now, and sadly, with little effect. So he encourages white people to start talking with each other, to have this very important conversation about the treatment of our black brothers and sisters. It's going to take courageous, informed, empathetic, committed white people, Acho writes, to challenge their racial peers who rely on white talk. If your goal is to fight racism, then you'll have to do your part. On the night of October 24th of this year, MSNBC aired a documentary called Civil War, or Who Do We Think We Are? Over 75 minutes, the history of America from the abolition of slavery and through the Jim Crow years that followed were discussed by professors and elementary and high school teachers as well as distinguished historians. Held forth from college lecture halls to middle and high school classrooms about the issue of race in our country today, 3 speakers and their messages stood out for me. Dr. David Bly, Yale professor and Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, established a construct that would be reiterated throughout the special. While the Civil War might have been a decisive victory for the Union, the Confederate States over the years defined themselves as victims of Northern aggression, and in the end, it was they who won the peace. Chris Carpenter, a history teacher at Chattanooga School System, explained to his class that the victor usually writes the history, but in this case, the northern states, once they had won the conflict, abandoned the freed slaves to their fate under their former masters. The result was Jim Crow. Segregation, redlining, Confederate flags, statues and monuments to Confederate heroes, and over the next 100 years, over 25 massacres in black communities, like the New York City draft riots of 1863 and the Tulsa massacre of 1921. Now, rather than just quote historical statistics, I want to add to that for just a minute. A lot of people don't know this, but what had happened in New York City in 1863 is a lot of Irish immigrants came to the United States. This is not a hack on the Irish, but what happened was the federal government immediately drafted them to go into the Civil War. And they were mad, you know, and what they did was they really trashed New York City. And it wasn't just the Irish, it was all the other white people. And they got to this group of black orphans that were in an orphanage down in lower Manhattan. And they had to put these kids on a barge and put them out into the East River in order to protect them from the mobs. This has been going on for a very long time. Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson, professor of African Studies at Wellesley College and author of the book Force and Freedom, stated it's time for white people to be proactive about civil rights, speak up for them, and advocate for them, so people of color do not have to do all of this work. White allies need to take a radical stance. I wrote this conversation to begin this dialogue about race with other white people, to speak up, to instruct, hopefully to enlighten, and ultimately to convince white people, and any or all others that might need to hear what these poems are saying, that the America of the future must be different from the America of the past, different even from the America of the present. While this conversation uses the paradigm of an accidental meeting between two white men at a local bar, it is through this device that I encourage the reader to eavesdrop on their conversation, to think about the problems inherent in systemic racism that plague our country today, and finally to have this conversation with others. I'm going to digress from the script at this point because I don't think you have to know anything more about this other than the fact that I'm going to say something very strange. I didn't write this book for the people who are going to buy it, because the people who are going to buy it like poetry, or at least have a passing interest in it. They also have a certain sympathy towards the topic, okay? But that's not the people that have to read it. This book is for the second reader. Once you read it, you go, wow, I know someone that could benefit from this. It's the second reader that I wrote this book for. One of my classmates from college bought 16 copies and sent them all over the United States to his classmates. That was pretty cool. But by the way, if you think we make a lot of money off this stuff, my royalty check last year was for $14.37. So
every year, year in, year out.
You don't make money off poetry. Even if you'll notice, well, what about poet laureates? I've met Robert Pinsky. As a matter of fact, he did a blurb for one of those books I gave you. They all have to be college professors. They can't live off poetry residuals. So, at any event, what the structure of this book is it's a conversation between two white men at a bar. And it's an accidental conversation. And for those of you that might know the area, as I wrote this, I pictured the Sitting Duck. I love that place. And that bar just seemed to me to be the place to go. So that was where I pictured the conversation. It starts out with this guy coming in and taking the only seat left at the bar, and it ends up with the first guy who was sitting there in the beginning leaving and going back to his family. And in the period of 3 beers and 2 hours, this conversation takes place. I want to also tell you one other thing, that one of my sensitivity readers, a black poet named James Ellerby, and I are writing a sequel to this called The Next Conversation. And it's really about us writing back and forth to each other about things, you know, like white people now talking to people of color and saying, you know, you tell me what bothers you. There are certain things that I can, you know, like for example, I've talked to him on a number of occasions about the N-word. You know, not only shouldn't that be used, it shouldn't be used by anybody. You know, so at any event, that's the conversation we're having. But let's go back to the original book. This is this conversation. And it starts out, I'm going to read you a few of the poems just to give you an idea, and then I'll open this to questions. This conversation, when? And this is based on, I selected 2 poems that begin and end this collection. 1962, President John Kennedy repeated the words uttered millennia ago by Rabbi Hillel. If not now, when? If not me, who? This conversation, when? This conversation we're starting today must not end at the end of this day. Not in with the last hand-lettered sign written some black brother's blood. Not in with the last car burning in anguish. Not end with the last mile marched in frustration, nor end with the last tears shed in stark sorrow over another young black brother's grave. This conversation we're starting today must be the start of a brand new beginning. Not like the beginning of past conversations abandoned long before they'd begun. Not the conversation that was set to be settled by abolition, by emancipation, by civil war. Nor even the last conversation of commitment abandoned to lies long before they were born in the marching, in the jailing, in the shooting, and the dying over 60 years ago. This conversation we're starting today must begin with one question that is echoed eternal in every black church and from every black voice, from the north to the south, from the east to the west, and from each generation to the next and the next. For that one eternal question, how long, can no longer be answered, not long. Now this conversation we will start here today must finally answer this one simple question at last and forever, and for all time eternal, with only one answer, and that answer needs to be now. I'm going to read you the first discourse. I kind of had it, we have a civil war in this country. We've got really, the country's divided, not in half, I would say, but certainly divided along a whole lot of lines. There are people who look at this country and say, white Christian country, anybody else should leave. And then there are other people that say, multicultural country, you know, a country that all should be welcome in. So I refer to these discussions that one of the guys has at the bar with the other as a civil discourse, but as a skirmish. So, you know, it's not a battle, but it's just kind of like a little shoot back and forth. It was just an ordinary night at the bar that sat at the edge of our town. The white noise of conversation was punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the dull thud of beer bottles being dropped onto cardboard mats. Suddenly I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Excuse me," a voice said as he pulled out the stool. "Is anyone sitting here?" "There is now," I replied. He sat down by my side and signaled the bartender for a beer. I went back to watching the overhead screen and the demonstrators marching to seek justice for the death of George Floyd. The bartender came over and said, "What do you have?" The man at the stool, his eyes glued to the screen, pointed at my bottle of beer. Within a fast minute, the bartender returned and placed the cold beer on the mat. The man in the stool raised his beer to his lips, took a sip, then spoke to the screen without turning to me. "What do you think about what's going on in the streets of America these days?" "What do you think?" I asked him. He sat for a moment in silent reflection, his cold beer clasped firm in his hand. "Why are you answering my question with a question?" He took a long hit of his beer. "Do you really need me to know what I think?" I asked him. Don't you know what the answer should be? Easy, buddy. Just trying to make conversation. He paused and took another hit. Okay, he stated when I failed to reply. I don't get their beef, and I don't know what that beef has to do with me. Didn't say, I responded. I'm just drinking my beer. And I but maybe use a they. Don't you think that that word might be the problem here? Well, aren't they as opposed to us? He pointed the neck of his beer towards the screen. Well, I replied, I thought we were both on the same side. I thought that us was really just we. You know what I mean, he replied in frustration. I mean that you and I are both of the same race. So it's really just us that's we. I know what you mean. I took a sip of my beer. But look at that screen. There's black and there's white, marching together in the same common cause. Don't you think that they think of themselves as we? But they're not all white, he quickly insisted. Not like you and like me. And how does that matter? I asked in reply. They both have 2 arms, 2 legs, have a mother and a father and a heart that beats with the same red blood as we. Yeah, I know, but... Or are you saying they're not human? Is that what you believe? No, he answered quickly, and then he paused for a moment. I guess I just look at them as different from me. Why, I asked. I guess that's just the way I was taught. I get that, I replied. And in a way, so was I. But maybe we're due to learn something new. Something just a little less judgmentally fraught. Something different from we were once taught was so true. From what we were once so very carefully taught. I don't know whether you noticed, but these dialogues are free verse poetry. And while they're laced kind of with rhyme, they read like dialogue. So you're reading a dialogue back and forth. I'm going to read you 2 more, and then if you want, I'll read you 1 or 2 more after that, if you want to. But if you want to get to a discussion, I'd be more than happy to do that too. The next one is called Skin in the Game. And what it has to do with is basically that unless we have skin in the game, unless we have a friend that's black, unless we have a friend that's gay, unless we have a friend that's Hispanic, unless we have a friend that's a Muslim, we don't really have skin in the game. And I think that this generation, the younger generation, is going to be very different from us. And the reason why I say that is because I was taught to be a racist. And it wasn't a bad thing when I was taught. But it just didn't seem to make any sense to me. It's called Skin in the Game. And this is, by the way, a poetry form, and it's called a villanelle. If only we could share another's skin and see life through their eyes for just one day, we'd realize we're so much more than kin. We'd only need 1 drop of melanin to understand what life is like as they. If only we could share another's skin. One day, 1 drop for every citizen in every town across the USA would make us realize we're more than kin. We'd learn at least that white's not sovereign, but equal to all colors on that day. If only we could share another's skin. They paid the price for suffering for our sin. Their generations have watched their dreams delayed until we learn we're so much more than kin. It's time for us to finally welcome in our kin of color cast so far away. If only we could share another's skin, we'd understand we're so much more than kin. And the last thing I'm going to read to you, unless you would like me to read a little more, is the end, which is very much like the beginning from the John Kennedy quote, instead of when, this is who. This conversation you've heard here today is the same conversation that must not go away. When the last demonstrator packs his son up and leaves to go home to his family, till the next black family grieves over the next black life lost, in the streets of our cities, this conversation must be the cost. No, this conversation cannot cease to exist, because what caused this conversation. Conversation cannot cease in our midst, in our thoughts, in our choice of friends. And while hatred still has a home out there, this conversation must never end. No, this conversation must continue for as long as it takes, for every single person in the whole human race to accept as truth what we all need to believe, that all men and women are equal, regardless of race, color, or creed, regardless of gender or orientation. All of them is us, and all of us is we. Until we can comfortably live in each other's skin, that we are all the same family, that all of us are kin, when the day finally comes that each feels empathy so deep within him or herself, then and only then can we put this conversation back upon the shelf. But until that day arrives, there's so much more we have to do, so many conversations to start, and the one who needs to start them is you. Dr. Kelly Jackson stated, white allies need to take a radical stance. By writing this book, I have chosen to try to be one of those allies and to take that stance. I have written this book of poetry to do my part. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Chris to start out with?
Well, I have a couple of points and then a question.
Sure. You mind if I say it?
Oh, sure. Well, go right ahead. I think what I gleaned from what you read is that the black community will not solve racism. It's not their job to solve racism. They need the input from the others. That's one comment. Second comment, I worked in the inner city. I taught school in Newark in the early 60s. There was one white kid in the school. The school was entirely black. The grammar school was the school my mother went to. So you get an idea how old the school would be. But inside the black community, you said something about the N-word. I know it exists. It probably exists today. Their way of bantering, they will call each other nigger.
Yes.
And that's a problem. And then I don't know how we break through that and start a communication when the norms may be a little different. Okay, and you can respond, and then I have my question finally.
Go ahead.
Okay. You said something about, the South basically, in your estimation, won the war. And it's not connected to your poetry, but a thought where it seems to me a problematic situation when we want to be politically correct and maybe overextend ourselves. What is your feeling about the removal of statues of the Southern heroes? And from my studies in history, I'll take Robert E. Lee as an example. He was a scholar, he was a gentleman, he was revered, and the only reason he fought for the South is that he had loyalties to his home state because he was, they besieged him to lead the Northern forces. What is your opinion about moving the statues or tearing them down?
Well, Kyrie Irving is being denied the right to play, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that, because he has come out with some anti-Semitic comments. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want my personal opinion, because a lot of times poets can't, in other words, I put in this book what I believed to be historically accurate and true. As far as my own personal opinions go, they're close, but there are some nuances. And I'll give you a good example. You brought up the N-word. I have had discussions with black friends, and I have said, there was an incident of my favorite rapper. You're going to be surprised I'm 76 years old and I listen to rap. But I do it because a few years ago, Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer Prize. And I said, how? It's rap, How could this be? And I listened to the album, Damn. which is the album that he wrote. And then I bought all the past albums. Man's a genius. You know, and while the idiom might not necessarily be one that we white folk are comfortable with, it is nonetheless, I mean, we've adopted other black idioms. We've adopted the blues. We've adopted jazz. They all came from Africa, the Caribbean, and through Louisiana and the black population down there. So what I'm saying is that, and you know, if you take a look at some of the music, even that's being produced out of Britain, a whole lot of it looks a little like rap. So black people have had a tremendous impact, a cultural impact on our world. So the point you bring up is nuanced, but it's an interesting point because one night Kendrick Lamar was on stage and he was singing DNA, which, by the way, I wrote a poem in this book called One Drop. Are you familiar with, you know, the one drop rule? Interesting. If you have one drop of white blood, you're still black. If you have one drop of black blood, you're black. So one drop must be pretty powerful. They must have pretty powerful blood if they can do that. But what's happening is, it's exclusion. That's what it comes down to. We're excluding anybody who isn't at our standard. So what happened was, he's on stage and he's singing DNA. And he calls up someone to sing. And a white woman gets up on stage and starts to sing with him. And when it comes to the N-word, she sings along with him. And when she does it the second time, he stops the song. And he said, wait a minute, you're not allowed to sing that word. And she said, well, then why did you write it? You know? So what I did is I said, well, how about this? How about if I buy his albums? If I can't sing that out loud in the car, then maybe I should get a discount. You know? And only, you know, so I can only, or maybe what you should do is Bogarize these songs and take all those words out for white folk. You know? Once again, what you're doing is separating. You know? And it is difficult because I think owning the word for them, as Ta-Nehisi Coates said, this is our word, it takes the sting out of it if it's used, you know, by the oppressed people. The oppressed word then becomes theirs, not the oppressors. I get all of that. But I still, if you're asking my opinion, I figure the time has come to get rid of it. I just don't think it solves anything, and it hurts people.
It just builds a wall, basically.
It does.
And
So
another
we have to
tangential
destroy
comment.
walls, not build them.
We used to live in a community, and we had the expression DWB, which was driving while black.
Yes.
Because down the mountain, the cop was always sitting, and invariably, the person pulled over was black.
And I got to tell you, I mean, I've had a lot of experiences. I mentored a number of kids. I retired 12 years ago from teaching in Long Branch. And my kids in Long Branch were 1/3 black, 1/3 Hispanic, and 1/3 white. And of that, about 1/3 of them were Portuguese and Brazilian. So it was a pretty heavily multicultural district. And I mentored one kid who grew up in foster homes. And when he got out of high school, he just said, I really need help, and you were noted for talking to people. Could you? And so I did. You know, I used to take him out for his birthday and stuff. And one day he came over, the last time he came over for his birthday, and he asked a friend of his, whose father's a lawyer, to drop him off at my house. And the father had a white Mercedes. I've lived in Eatontown for 48 years. They were driving through Eatontown, and they got pulled over to the side. And the driver, the lawyer's son, said, what's the problem? Which you have every right to ask. And he said, I'll do the questions here. Get out of the car. So they had to get out of the car. The Cops checked the car, and then with no reason why they stopped the car, they just told him to get back in the car and to drive on, so he was late. I was furious. I've lived in town for 48 years. So I said to Terrell, I'm going down right now to the police station. I'm going to ask who the hell that cop was, and I want to know why he pulled you two over. And Terrell calls me Uncle Bogey. And he said, Uncle Bogey, don't do that. Because you know what happens? My friend will get pulled over every damn time after that by cops, just trying to get even. You know? I don't know how to explain this, so I'm going to say it outright. I don't have any idea of how awful living while black is every single day in this country. But I know it's a continual defensive struggle. And from talking to enough people who are willing to talk to me, I talked to like 20 of my students before I wrote this book and asked them specific questions, and they told me stories. I can tell you stories from now till the cows come home. There is a thing, driving while black. This is the son of a lawyer, you know, who had every right to drive a white Mercedes because they earned it. I don't know whether you know this or not, but L.A. Law, what's his name, Underwood. Blair Underwood, good-looking black man that was in L.A. Law in the 80s. He finally got on a good television show. He's making good money. He bought himself a Mercedes, and the cop pulled him over because they didn't think he could own that car. We wouldn't take that. Why are they being given? You know? So I think that's why I wrote this book. Because one of my friends who's a black poet, his name is Ross Aru. He says, this conversation is to be read with an open heart and chest and a mirror in hand, as it will force readers to re-examine themselves. This is crucial work from a true ally. I really value that, and I hope to be able to live up to it. You had a second part to your question?
Oh, about the statues, and I mentioned, I referenced Robert E. Lee, and, you know, I know there's a movement to, you know, take them all down or smash them and whatever. And a term that I learned when I was at Seton Hall was called hermeneutics, which is basically you have to take what happens, the events that happen in the context of their times, and you can't bring today's mores as an overlay and superimpose them.
Okay.
So you have to take the things as they occurred, because technically, if the movement would continue, they should take down any statue of George Washington.
No.
You know, I mean, because he had slaves too.
Yes, he did.
So,
But
you know,
he
I
didn't
say,
fight
are we
a
bending
war to
too
protect
far?
them, though.
Pardon?
But he didn't fight a war to protect them.
Okay.
Try to picture Germany
No.
with all of the former Nazi statues all over the place, because after all, they were a part of the context of their history. They denazified. You've got Russia presently fighting in Ukraine because they're claiming there are Nazis. There are no Nazis there. They've got a Jewish president, you know, but that seems to sell. My feeling is, yes, it was a part of their past. And to be quite honest, we should have had them, never allowed them to even put them up. You know, I don't know whether you know this, but the day that the courts under Kennedy came in and desegregated an Alabama school, George Wallace stood on the steps. But that morning, instead of the American flag being raised over the Capitol building in Alabama, the Confederate flag was raised. Maybe we have to be more sensitive to the fact that black folk who walk by these things every day, that they are a continued insult and reminder to what they and their ancestors had to go through. And to be honest, it ain't over. It just ain't over. I'll tell you another story. I run a poetry group, and I was opening up Eatontown Library, and it was pouring rain. And there's an overhang, if you've ever been to Eatontown Library, right before the side door. And I was unlocking the door, and there was a young black man standing there, anywhere from 19 to 22. And came up and I went to open the door, he says, "I'm standing here because I have to get a cab. I just wanted you to know that." I said, "Okay." And I walked in and, he didn't have to tell me that, I knew he give rats. So at any event, yeah, I caught myself. So at any event, I walked in and I was setting up tables. All of a sudden I said, "Whoa, wait a minute." And I went back out and I said, "Why did you tell me that?" And he said, "Because I thought you would need to know." I said, "Only your mother and dad need to know where you are. I don't. Do not apologize for being anywhere in public space. The more you do that, the more you encourage people to ask for your explanations. Don't do that again, please. I think it's time we speak up. That's why I did this. I think it's time we speak up." Any other questions? Because I got a load of information I can give you. Yeah.
Well, first I'd like to start with asking you a little bit more about the other poems in the book. How many are there, and is there a sequence to them in this conversation?
Oh, yeah. The conversation keeps on going, and I'll show you how that works. And that's why I said I'll read whatever you want to read to. There's the first skirmish, the second skirmish, the third skirmish. Try to picture this. This is a conversation between two strangers. And if one wants to win an argument, he's going to say, "Well, what about this? Well, what about that?" All right? I'll give you, and what happens is the discussion is the skirmish. And then there's usually a poem that comes at the end of that skirmish. And it elucidates the reader as to, for example, I don't use this example in the book, but I love this example. I don't need you to answer this, but think about this. When someone says, well, you even say, politically correct. Are we not using certain words because they're politically correct or because they're offensive? You know what I'm saying? Because you're going to have people that are saying, "Well, these woke people aren't letting me." No, we're telling you not to do it because it's insulting. That's what we're telling you not to do it for, because it hurts other people. So when somebody says Black Lives Matter, and white people have a tendency to come back and say, "Well, don't all lives matter?" Well, how about if one morning you and I are working together and you come into work and you go, "Chris, I was up all last night. My mom passed away." And I said, "All mothers pass away sooner or later." You go, "Wait a minute, wait. You're not addressing my pain. My pain is that my mother passed away, not all mothers." Or why are you wearing that pink ribbon? It's for breast cancer month. Well, all people are going to die of one cancer. And whoa, wait a minute. What I'm trying to say is that we seem to have what the moral equivalent of blinders are to the ears. We don't hear pain anymore because so many people think that it is justifiable, to say, "Well, this isn't logical." There's no logic about it. It's emotional. It hurts. And that's the reason why it's being said. Yes, all lives matter. Every single life matters. But that's not what someone is trying to tell you when they say Black Lives Matter. They're trying to say your kid isn't being gunned down in the street like my kid is. And I have some personal experience with that. So, as a matter of fact, there's a poem in here, which is a sonnet. It's a double sonnet. And it basically talks about one black kid after another that was killed. I dedicated this book to 125 black kids who were killed by the police over the last 25 years. In the beginning, it wasn't personal, you just don't think too much about it, you know? But it is us. It is us. And once you have a black friend, or a black son, or a black relative, all of a sudden it becomes personal. Statistically, I mean, I was watching, and I know, because I talked to a number of people about this, Black Panther, when that came out, we said, oh, it's a, what do they call it, comic book, Marvel universe. To people of color, that was an amazing film. And the reason why it was, and a lot of people, well, let me ask, does anybody know why that movie so affected the black community? And if you can look at the commercials that are out for Wakanda Forever, you can almost understand why it affected the black community that way. Anybody got an idea? No? 12 million people were taken out of Africa and were brought over here. And by the way, in the book, one of the things he goes, well, you know, they weren't doing anything over there. They were dressed in loincloths and they had spears and they were. Listen, I grew up in a Catholic school where we used to, excuse me for this, but we used to have a mite box for pagan babies every year. That's what we taught of people of color. So, by the way, there's a really good book, Caste, C-A-S-T-E, is written by a college professor. It's a great book. I think it's Isabel Allende? No. That's Salvatore Allende's daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's Isabel, I'll think of it. Dickerson? Something like that. In any event, where's my phone? So, so what there's a line in Black Panther in the end, and I put it in the book as an epigraph. And it's right before, where is it? Yeah, it's right before middle passage.
Wilkerson.
Wilkerson, that's who it is, thank you. Killmonger in Black Panther says this when he's dying. He says, just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships because they knew death was better than bondage. 2 million Africans were deposited in the Atlantic Ocean before they got to the New World. 10 million of them made it to the New World. 888,000 of them made it to the United States. Think about that. So now we're talking about 9 million people. We didn't get most of them. We got hardly any of them. Where did they go? They went all over the Caribbean, and they went to Central and South America. Brazil got 4 million. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is they were hired with a very brief lifespan, by the way, to cut sugar cane, which, by the way, cuts you up unbelievably when you harvest it. That's what we had them for. And yet, they came from a culture, and see, this is why Black Panther is important, because Wakanda, even though it might be a fake country, Wakanda has the same source of pride to some extent, if I might. I'm not trying to, what do they call it, appropriate, you know? I'm just trying to guess. We know where we came from. We know what European country we came from. We know what our grandparents' names were. I just said something in the beginning of this thing, that my mother's family got a land grant from William Penn, came over here in 1640 and set up Radnor, Pennsylvania. My father's family came over in 1668 on a ship called the Bridal Cow from Holland. And there's a Bogart Street in every one of the 5 boroughs of New York. We know where we came from. unless they go into Ancestry, have no idea where they came from. We took them and brought them here and would not allow them to have any of their past, their cultural past. So for them, this is a film and hopefully the beginning of an odyssey that might get black families to say, you know what, we need to know where we came from. And in this book, by the way, I mentioned the wealthiest man in the world, if for all time. Does anybody know who the wealthiest man in the world was? The one with the most gold. And if you Google that, I bet you come up with the answer I'm about to give you. Mansa Musa. He was an African chief of, if I'm not mistaken, his capital was Timbuktu, and they had a university over 100 years before Europe had a university. African culture was quite sophisticated. They didn't run around in loincloths and spears. That's what this book is supposed to talk about as well. Questions, anybody? I'm just gabbing away here. Yeah.
It's a comment. I think directing attention to the conversation being between two white men, or two white people, it could have been two white women, or whatever, is very important, because it's one thing, I'm just thinking skin in the game. I think it's important for us, those of us who are white, who to share our experiences and what our experiences were early, what our personal history is in terms of our interaction with people of color, people different from ourselves, whether it's, in this case, it would be black and white. I mean, it's one thing to have a book where you have poems that are one person's black and one person's white. That would be a whole different
That's what I'm writing now. Yeah.
You know, that would be the next step, as you say. But until there's some self-examination, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I'm sure each one of us would have a lot to say about what our growing up experiences were, and they would all be very different, how much skin in the game we have regarding this. You know, how you suggested that you were in a Catholic school, and how that mite box, you know, created an impression on you. And I could talk about being at Rutgers in Newark in 1969, when the black organization of students took over, you know, one of the buildings, and what were they asking for, and how was the university responding. So everybody would have something to bring to the conversation, so I think it's great. Now the question is, where do these conversations take place? How can they take place?
I am not trying to sell books. I'm really not. I'm a retired teacher. I get Social Security and a pension, and between those two, I am bringing home over $30,000 more than I was making when I was teaching. Because the tax is so much better once you retire, you know? So what I'm saying to you is that I don't need the money. My house is paid off. So I'm very lucky. I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this because I have something to say. I'm doing this because I would like this dialogue to begin. I'm doing this because there's an awful lot of black poets that I've met that I've never met in person, but I intend to, that have really been happy about my doing this. And if it does it for that alone, it's worth the cost of publication. You know? So I just think that to answer your question, maybe the best thing is to say, who needs this book? Who do you know that really would benefit by looking over this book and even starting a conversation? In other words, to say, they might say, you know, well, I figured you'd read something like this. Well, fine. Then talk about it, you know?
Why?
What do you have against this, you know? So, yeah, I mean, do that. I think that's, as I said, I think I started this out by saying, this book is not meant for the person who buys it. This book is meant for the person who that person gives it to. Because that's the person who will need it, you know? I'm proud of this. I'm proud of this, primarily because it had to be said. You know, and when we, I have another book. I have a few books, actually, and I brought them with me today. The one with the flag on it is called Breakpoint. And what it basically is it's, you know, in the last few years we've had two views of America, one white racist Christian, and the other one, you know, a very different view. And I go back into American history, and we were never a single race society, ever. As a matter of fact, we came here and took over from Indians, who were not our race. So I think that all of this will heal us as a country, and I don't think we're going to be happy unless we start believing that. There's a line in the front of this book. I have four quotes in the beginning of the book. The first one is from Frederick Douglass. No man could put a chain about the ankle of his fellow man without at last finding the other end fastened to his own neck. In other words, you can't enslave people without becoming enslaved to the slavery. Lyndon Johnson said, if you can convince the lowest white person he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice that you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and they'll give you the contents of his pocket. A southern sharecropper, I'm going to have to bleep out a word. I might be poor white trash, but at least I ain't no. And the thing that really touched me greatly, Doc Rivers in 2020, Doc Rivers is a coach for the Los Angeles Clippers. And he said, it's amazing why we keep loving this country, and this country doesn't love us back. That is so sad. This is maybe a love story for me to say, we do love you back. We just have a lot of crap to get past before we can clear the air. And hopefully, I'm hoping that this really does it, you know? And there's a piece of me that feels like an imposter. You know, it's kind of like, who am I to do this? But at the same time, if I don't, who does?
One of the things I noticed when I read the book, you allude to this notion of how close we in our lives live to or with people of color. That we don't even realize, but we still don't engage in their lives, that we still don't have, that we don't know them personally. I mean, and so have we had dinner with them? Have we visited them? Have we invited them to our homes? And then there's a twist in the book where that comes to life. You know, talk a little bit about that aspect of it.
Yeah. Like, Lewis is asking me to blow the ending.
That's just the concept behind it. That's
That's all right.
blow the ending.
I'm not Agatha Christie. I'm not writing. Would you like to sit?
No, thank you.
All right. I have a hard time with you standing because my mother always taught that you don't sit when a lady's standing. So that's tough. But in any event, I'm just going to say I'm way older than you are, so. But yeah, to talk about the ending of this is that and that's where skin in the game comes in. He leaves the bar, and remember, he's leaving the seat, you know? So the bar's crowded, there's only one seat. And he says to somebody, you have to reach out. I'm going to ask you a question I don't want you to answer. I want you just to think about it. Is there a person of color in your neighborhood? If there is, when have you met them? Or have you met them? And if you haven't, why not? I can tell you what I thought to myself in the beginning. I don't think, you know, how would I know they'd want to meet me? That didn't didn't stop me from introducing myself to anybody else in the neighborhood. So why would it stop me from introducing myself? Now, you and I have the same experience in a way. We've taught black kids for a number of years. So that kind of, that divide, you know, was bridged because you said, one way or the other, I'm going in that classroom, I'm teaching these kids. These are my kids, you know. I didn't always like them, but I always loved them, you know. You're gonna kill me. I have a student over here that I taught years and years ago, and there was a
There's black kids in that school.
Richard, yeah, no, Richard Gildersleeve.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I remember his mother one time said to me, Mr. Bogart, I love my son, I just don't like him.
He's my brother's best friend.
What?
Yes.
Gilders?
We didn't like him either.
You have a question?
No, an anecdote.
Go ahead.
Quick story. I taught in Newark. It was a difficult time for me. And I had this old broken down convertible. The class was entirely black. And if the kid was misbehaving, I went to their house. And I'd go up, and maybe it was a third story, and I'd walk up the steps, and the parent would say, oh, thanks for coming. Mr. M, if my kid gives you any trouble, you can go upside his head. Until you smack him around. And I said, no, I'll teach him, you discipline him. So you have to be there to really have the feeling and have the experience. And one other comment, please, I don't want to be talking too much. I think you need face-to-face dialogue. I think it's very helpful.
Yes.
However, here's the tagline, I think I'm correct. New Jersey is one of the most, if not the most, segregated state. Because it's not, you can't have de jure segregation, but it's de facto because of the socioeconomic situation.
You know, you've got a really good point there, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why I would agree with it is because you can't fight what you can't see. You know, in the South, you walk past Robert E. Lee, you walk past the Confederate, what do they call it, the Confederate monument that's cut into the side of the hill.
Yeah.
You know, and you know where you are.
Yeah.
You're in the South, you know. You don't have to wonder where the prejudice is coming from. The air reeks of it sometimes. It depends on where you are. Mississippi is a prime example. But up here, it's more covert. Not just covert, I would say it's more seditious. Because in the long run, it's the glance. It's what people aren't saying. As I said, I've mentored a number of kids. I was having dinner with them one night, with one of them, and he said to me, "Why is that couple looking at me?" And I said, "The poorhouse on Shrewsbury Avenue in Shrewsbury." Yeah, the country is saturated with this. There's a really good article, and I didn't want to dig all the way through this, but it's in there somewhere. James Ellaby, the black poet that I'm working with, he pointed it out to me. It's what many black people have to do to survive from day to day, and what that does to their psyche over time. It's invasive, it's pervasive, you know. It's at one time, last few years I was teaching in Long Ridge. My principal was black, and he used to call me into his office when we would sit and we would talk, and one of the things we would talk about was race, and one of the reasons why is because a lot of the teachers were women, and I don't think that these women thought, not all of them, that they had a racial bone in the body, or an anti-racist bone, or whatever you want to call it, a prejudice bone in the body. But at the same time, they were really afraid of black kids, big black kids, football players, basketball players. They were just children, those kids. do you know what that must, when someone is looking at you, and they're not looking at you for any particular reason, but they're fearing you, you feel like crap, but you don't know why. You know what I'm saying? And that's bad news, you know, because it's not something you can cut out like a tumor. It's something that's just in the air. And we're going to have to work very hard. And it's not going to be this generation, our generation. It probably won't even be the next generation. The bad news is, but the good news is, if we don't start it right here and right now, it's never going to be. So we have to do something. And I mean, I could go on with this forever. One of the things that I wrote was, you got to be carefully taught. Remember the song?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I wrote Carefully Taught, and it was, I don't want to read this, because it's got all the redactions in it, where the N-word is used.
Okay.
But I blacked the N-word out. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to show just where this showed up in a lot of people's childhood. My mother used to say it. So, like eeny, meeny, miny, moe. It wasn't catch a tiger by the toe. Tigers don't have toes. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe. I looked into that. That goes back to the 1800s. And that not only is that rhyme, but it's, let me see if I can find it. There's a version of it that if something, in other words, if the guy doesn't behave, cast him into the deep blue sea. Think about what I told you before. 2 million Africans thrown into the sea on the way over. That is callous at the very least. You know, it's just a part of our culture. You know, how often have you said, "Hey, listen, I'm 3 white and 21."
Nope, never said it.
I'd like to make a comment that's been on my mind for almost 2 weeks regarding the interview with Robert Pinsky at Monmouth University.
Did you go?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't go.
So it shows how deeply this kind of attitude could be ingrained without even noticing it, at least the way that I took this.
Yes, Master, please.
Yeah, so Robert Pinsky was laureate. He grew up in Long Branch.
3 years.
3 terms, 6 years.
6 years, that's right.
Yeah. He is well known throughout the world, and he was there to talk about his memoir. And he was being interviewed by a man, a dean from the school, to talk about the memoir. A man who I think should have been more sensitive to this. And his memoir is called Jersey Breaks. And he was asked what that meant. And while I can't speak exactly for word as he described it, but it meant being cut some slack, given a way to get by a little bit better. And he talked about his community on Rockwell Avenue. At the time when he was growing up, it was mixed with Italian and Jewish and black.
It's probably the most dangerous street in Long Branch right now.
Probably is. He commented in a way that he said, I talked about Frank Pallone's father, who was a police officer in town during that time, and the way that one time he got a break from him. And he actually said, I don't know if a black kid would have gotten that break. Maybe he would have, depends on his last name. But when I heard that, it made me think, Jersey Breaks, that's another term for white privilege. It's really not.
That's interesting.
that you're getting a break because you're from New Jersey or you happen to live in New Jersey. It's because you're the white kid on the block, or a white kid in the 1950s or late 40s when he was growing up. What do you think that cop would have done if the black kid needed the break? I think he would have said, you're a Simpson, I'm going to let you go. It was going to be, your mom can pick you up down at the station. And I just felt that a man like him, and the individual who was interviewing me, a person of color, I believed. I mean,
Who was the
he's
one
back,
who interviewed him?
a dean at the university.
You remember the dean's
I
name?
don't remember.
Because I just graduated from there, so I know a lot of it.
So, I just didn't realize that it's so pervasive that maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but it seems to me that it's not Jersey breaks, it's white privilege.
I have a poem in this book called Privilege, and I was so afraid it was going to be controversial, and because I don't believe in white privilege. I know that's...
Well, but when you say you don't believe in it, you mean you don't deserve it, or you don't think it's real?
I don't think it's white privilege. I think it's black disadvantage. I think that...
That's just the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah, no. Because by law, as a white person, I am getting what I deserve. They're not. And that to me is the crime. I'm not getting more than I deserve. If a cop pulls me over and is politer to me, he should be polite to everybody he pulls over.
Yeah, but if he doesn't give you a ticket, but he gives the black kid a ticket, then you're getting the privilege. Because it's up to him to decide, who do I give this ticket? Maybe I'll just give a warning. You know? So
Yes.
if you get the warning and the black kid gets the ticket, you have privilege.
But what I'm saying is the thing that bothers me more than anything is when many law enforcement officers look at a situation and see the color of the person in the situation. I think it triggers something that it wouldn't trigger anywhere else. Like, for example, if there were a white kid waiting outside for a taxi cab to come in the middle of the rain, I wouldn't have had to say what I said because he would never have said that. He wouldn't have said, oh, by the way, I'm just telling you why I'm out here. Why would I need to know why he was out there? But he was doing it because he's been very well trained to
I'd be
make sure
trained the
that
same way. If you were a woman who came to the door, I would certainly say, hey, I'm just staying out of the rain waiting for a cab to come.
Really?
In order to put her at ease about coming to the door with some guy who's under the awning, it's just in my nature to do that.
because
To explain to people my circumstances that might make them feel uncomfortable.
I say,
White privilege.
I don't know about white privilege. I don't know whether that I wouldn't have to explain myself.
You
I'm
feel
thinking-
privileged not to have to explain yourself.
I-
That guy didn't have that privilege. He wanted to say something to put you at ease.
I know, but what I'm saying to you is that as long as we consider it privilege, then we fail to see that the other is disadvantage. And it is disadvantage, it's continually, there's another, I do a lot of epigraphs, and the reason why I do them is because they come out of true experiences that I didn't have. All right, this is under Taught to Be Careful. I wrote two poems in here as African American forms, and when a black poet asked me why I did that, I said it was because in both those cases I thought it was appropriate. This is from Time Magazine on June 15, 2018. And this is black fathers share their fears and their hopes for their sons in America today. I got stopped again, Dad, again. And the cop asked me, who was your PO? And I said, what's a PO? And the cop yelled, parole officer. I was in a suit, Dad, a suit. a single tear fell down his face. He was a kid in a suit, but the suit wasn't good enough because his skin was black. And that's why I'm saying to you, Emmanuel Acho, in his book, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, came out recently too. He's a football player. I suggest all these books, that you read all these books, because they're good. He said, and this has to do with something else too, which we talk about, but I don't talk about it in here, and that's affirmative action, but it's something that's beginning to be talked about again. He said what they did was they sent out applications to different schools. The same application, the same resume, but one of them had L. Richard Jones, and the other one had the kid's real name, Lamont R. Jones. All the Lamonts got rejected just because of the name. Because there are trigger words, there are dog whistles, that let us know. My feeling is, I don't believe I would like to see, affirmative action end, and I'll tell you why. I would like to see affirmative action end because I don't want to see that there would ever be a reason for it again, but I also want to see legacy students end. I want to see sports scholarships end. I want to see Jared Kushner's father gave Harvard a ton of money and they let him in. I want to see that end. I want to see it where every kid, regardless of color, knows that if I do well in school, I don't have to come from any different background. I just have to compete against myself to get into that school. And the last thing is, before you do that, New Jersey had a case a number of years ago called the Abbott-Burke decision. And it was basically that you couldn't base a school system's development on the local tax base, because Camden doesn't have the same tax base that Rumson has. So in the long run, Abbott-Burke forced, I think it was Florio, to start making up with state money for whatever other districts. They had what they called the Abbott or the Urban 33 districts, and Long Branch was one of them. And I'm pretty sure that there were probably another. And so was Camden, and so was Asbury, and so was Neptune. So what I'm saying is that we got to level the playing field. But you still have the one problem. As long as people keep on judging people by their names, or the color of their skin, or by the hijab they're wearing, or by anything else, you got a problem. You still got a problem. Yeah.
Forgive me, Sharon. I was growing up. If you white, well, all right. If you black, that's that.
Oh, see, I heard get back.
And then, I had another, do you believe from all this discussion and all the things I've studied and we've talked about, do you believe there's such a thing as culturally inbred racism?
Yes.
Sure.
I think it's almost genetic.
Well, there are psychological experiments that show that you recognize and feel differently towards people of different colors. I mean, it's psychologically, I believe those studies will just prove that that's the case.
It has to be
People
taught.
feel that way.
You believe that they're inherent in genetics?
No, I don't say in genetics, but just,
It's cultural.
yeah.
I found when my mother passed away 12 years ago, I found that she kept all my books from when I was a kid. And one of them was a book about a family that was living in the city, and they had 2 children and a dog, and they were outgrowing their apartment, and that any of the homes in the suburbs that they looked at, they couldn't afford. It's a white family, obviously, because we didn't write about black families, unless it was Little Black Sambo. So at any event, what they did is, and I'm reading this book, I love this book. And I'm reading through this book and I'm saying, oh, I remember when it was read to me. And so what they did is somebody told them, buy a cheap piece of property outside of town, in the country. Build your own house. And then live out there, you know? And so what they decided to do was do that. And one of the things they had to learn was they had to learn about construction. But they also had to learn about pouring cement. They also had to learn about building a fireplace. They also, you know, they had to learn about putting up drywall. They, you know, all the things that would go to making a house. So they went to different places to learn different skills. And I turned the page, and there is the guy that's teaching them how to mix cement. And it looks like something off a pancake box. Big, thick, red lips. Big eyes, white eyes. I thought it was a cartoon, but I looked at the rest of them, and this was our perception of the other. And this is what we were raised on. And I thought to myself, I never questioned this. I never questioned this. Why would I? There was nobody that I could hurt, that I could keep this opinion for the rest of my life, and it wouldn't hurt anybody, you know? But, yeah, we were definitely taught. Definitely taught. And not cruelly, sometimes just simply, without even thinking. It was just our world, you know? What is becoming obvious now is because, I'm sorry to make a political statement, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that here, but the MAGA people have decided to make the unspeakable speakable. You know, it's okay to feel that way. Yeah, if you don't care about anybody else but yourself, I guess so. But we're living in a world we're too isolated. You know, our strength comes from the fact that we took, if you like Christianity, the stone that was rejected by the builder, and we made it the cornerstone of the building. That's what America did. We didn't take wealthy Italians. We didn't take wealthy Irishmen. We took the victims of the potato famine. And that's, by the way, what's also in here. And everybody, you know, we took the wretched refuse. You know, that's what it says in the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these the homeless tempest tossed to me. I light my lamp beside the golden door. But see, European immigrants came in and saw the Statue of Liberty. Blacks came in and saw slave stalls at the wharfs. They didn't have the same experience. They didn't choose to come over. Europeans chose to come over. Yeah.
Going back to something about colleges.
Yeah, please don't raise your hand. There's so few of you here.
Am I mixing this up, or was there a movement within the past number of years to do away with sending in your photograph, your college application?
Yeah, I think they don't do that.
Yeah, well, obviously that was a way to see who was applying. And if we don't want you,
I never sent a photograph, they never.
I'm lucky I didn't send mine, they would have checked the mail. Is this ugly
Well,
guy?
I'm saying. You know, I think also, it's the subtle racism to me, underpinning everything,
No God, yeah.
that is much more dangerous than the overt racism.
Well, that's one of the things here, too, is that what I try to say is, you know, if you're showing me that you're a racist, I'm proud of it, well, at least I know where you stand. I'm going to get stabbed in the front. It's the people that will stab you in the back that you have to watch out for. That's what you have to worry about.
And who was the wealthy black man? I used to love watching the show. Amos and Andy. Did he buy all the shows?
From Kingfisher?
Whoever, you know.
But that was our.
No,
that
he
was
bought
our
all the shows so
concept
they
of
couldn't be
black-
shown again. No? There's someone who bought the rights to all the Amos and Andy.
Oh, okay, I see what you're talking about.
And so he
So they
owned
couldn't
them
be
and they
shown.
couldn't put them back on TV. I thought it was hysterical when I used to watch it. Amos, you know, all the time I watched it. But this black man, I guess, realized that it portrayed people, you know, his race in not in the most positive light, even though it was pretty funny. He didn't want to see them anymore, so he bought the rights to all of them, and you can't see them. I forget who it was.
To go back to the statement about politically correct, I think, wow, I'm really in trouble here. I like Dave Chappelle. I like him as a comedian. And he teeters on the line, and he does it on purpose. And he does it because, like a number of other comedians who do the same thing, I saw, what's his name, John Cleese from Monty Python, and he was live in Asbury Park about 3 years ago. And he was talking about that, and he has been accused of stepping over the line sometimes. Not racially, just tastefully, you know? So, when you find out that you've offended someone, and you didn't mean to, again, this is just my opinion. I'm a poet, you know, not the bishop of Trent. To me, the proper response is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. If it offended you, I'm sorry to hear that. However, yes, do I have freedom of speech? Yeah, I do. I have the right to say that. I have the right to say the N-word. But you want to know something? You have the right to judge me based upon my using it. You know, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You can't. There's no get out of jail free card. If you know that something's offensive, don't do it. Because we're not supposed to hurt our fellow man. We're supposed to love our fellow man. And if you love your fellow man, you don't hurt him. At least that's the way I feel about it. You know, if somebody says to you, you might not think this was offensive, but it was offensive. Okay, fine. I still don't believe it's offensive, but which is more important now? For me to stick by my beliefs, or for me to be sensitive to another person's feelings? Yeah.
I was going to say, following up on that thought, I mean, there's something to be learned, because then you say, well, exactly how did it make you feel? You know, it could be the beginning of
Yes.
this conversation.
That's a really good point. And what I was saying about this is what I wanted this to do. I wanted this to be a conversation starter. You know, and yeah, you're right.
Obviously, it has
To ask people, what do you know, why would you say that? Tell me why that's offensive. Because I would like to. I think that's what they're doing right now, isn't it, with the anti-Semitic comments? They're talking about, I had put on Facebook, I Googled what percentage of the people that run the entertainment industry are Jewish. About 60%.
Used to be more.
What percentage of professional basketball players are black? 72.3%. I put both those quotes down, and then I put so what?
But if someone says like Kyrie, was it Kyrie?
Kyrie.
If he says, I'm sorry you're offended, that's not an apology.
Correct.
You know, if you say, I'm sorry you feel bad about what I said, it's not a direct apology. It's a way of, I think, skirting the issue. It's not an outright admission.
This is your wife next?
Yeah, well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want to assume.
No.
My boyfriend.
But what I'm saying is that, and she just said it, this might be a teachable moment
Yeah.
where you turn and you say, why has that offended you? You know, because I would like to know to avoid that in the future. And if I find, you know, I mean, I'm just trying to think of, oh, do you remember when we used to do this when we were younger? You would use the word faggot. And you know, well, I don't mean it like the guy's gay, I just mean it like it's a bundle of sticks. You didn't mean it as a bundle of sticks. Come on, give me a break. You know, I mean, so what I'm saying is that, once again, it's a person's feelings, as far as I'm concerned, they can. And by the way, it's their image as well. You know, if you're purveying an image, whether it's through art, through music, through writing, through anything, a stereotype, if you're promoting a stereotype, then, you know, I think that's a healthy conversation. I'm almost finished my first novel.
How thick are the papers?
Oh, God, for that.
Couple blocks.
And it's a 350-page novel already. And it's about two kids, 15-year-olds from Honduras, who are traveling north to try to come to America in, I think, 2000. And all of a sudden, a book came out called American Dirt. And cultural appropriation exploded all over the publishing industry. Now, I had written this as a short story years before, but in case you haven't noticed, I'm not Honduran. And nor am I 15. I can show you pictures when I'm 15. But what I'm saying is that my advisor was petrified that I would be accused of cultural appropriation and the novel wouldn't get published when it was finished. Because I had written it in the first person, in two first-person accounts. So, in order to graduate, I had to write the major character in the third person. I had to change the whole novel to the third person. It's all right.
That's interesting.
No, I mean, it wasn't absolutely necessary, but it was called a close third person. So a close third person is when you know it's the first person, but he's writing in the third person. You know? So he just knows things that third person guy wouldn't. At any event, so we had to be sensitive to that. There's a certain point beyond which I would go, all right, enough. You know? As a writer, I don't think Tolkien said, well, I'm not an elf. Should I be worried about that? But at the same time, yeah, the woman that wrote American Dirt, I read the book and I read the reviews on it. She was wrong. You know? Not because she wasn't Latin and she wrote the book. She was wrong because she wrote a book of stereotypic characters that she didn't even bother to research. And as a result, she ended up literally giving a black eye to Latinos coming from Central America because it made them look, you know, I one time said, I don't want to write characters that look like Speedy Gonzales. You know? I don't want them to talk like that either. You know, so I mean, I just, you have to be careful. Once again, it comes down to people's feelings and people's identities. And in the case, you know, to keep on going back to African Americans, I just think that we, as a white society, we are not connected in a way that we need to be. Bertha Kitt said something. My mother almost threw a shoe at the TV when she heard it. She said, this problem didn't get solved until everybody's mixed race. My mother was horrified by that. I'm almost sure that she was probably right. Unless you got skin in the game, one way So, I think that, and by the way, even if I didn't have those experiences, I think I still would. You were talking about, I worked in the poppy program in the 60s in New York City. I was going to college, and then during the summer I worked in the poppy program. I went to 165 housing projects, some of them pretty dangerous ones too. I grew up in a housing project in Queens, public housing project. When the kids used to say to me from Longbridge and say, you know, we're growing up in the ghetto, I said, no, you're growing up in a seaside resort. So, anyhow, you have any other questions?
I'm intrigued, you were talking about the Africans coming over and they don't know where they're from. Do you think they want to? I mean, I have a lot of black friends. I'm not going to ask them all, do you know where you're from? Have you done your ancestry? I mean, I find that very interesting. I'm really into it, so I know where my people are from, and I know you do, and my husband. But I just find that very interesting. Do they even care? I know some of them do, but I wonder how many of them, some of them know they're from the Caribbean islands, but the African ones, and I've
Well,
watched
the ones from the Caribbean islands are also African.
Right, I know, but just watch that Ancestry show with the,
Lewis Gates.
yeah, he's fabulous. And, you know, I'm always amazed when he has a black person on and they're like, oh my God, that's where my family's from? So you wonder if more of them were into it, if that would change, I don't know.
Do you ever wonder why, when you see college graduates, I don't think it's done with high school, but college graduates that wear the African colors? I can't speak for black Americans. I'm not black, all right, obviously. But I would assume, if I were in their shoes, that I would feel at a disadvantage for not knowing where I came from. Not because I didn't know, but because the people that I descended from were ripped from their homelands and denied their, let me read you a poem. It's funny, I wrote some poems here. Can I read it? This is called Middle Passage, and it's in 3 parts. And I am not even going to begin to try to pronounce. I did the titles in Yoruba, which is the language that most of the Africans we brought over here spoke. So the first section is, spiked spears reached up to strike the skies of Manin Korokwa. Its capital of Timbuktu stretched out to both horizons. The kingdom of the richest man the world has ever known, the empire of Mali, once the great gold world of Mansa Musa, greatest emperor in all of Africa. Thousands of greats once sang songs and told tales to spread the word of brave Mandinka warriors, their language and their laws. Brave Mandinka warriors spread language and spread laws. Each warrior by law had to be her own, a freeman caste. And with the help of river clans, they kept the Mali peace. The Sankara Madrasa held 1 million manuscripts, the largest library in the world since Alexandria. The shadows of spiked spears around the great Djenne Mosque spread out from Mali's desert sands to Mali's ocean sea. The second part of this. The coast of Mali's ocean sea was dotted with the ports. The slave ships docked, their sails still furled, awaited human cargo. Of 20 million captured from the island's interior, half don't survive the torturous journey to the western coast. Once they arrived at Mali's ports, their woolly heads were shaved. Their naked backs were seared with brands that glowed in dark ships' holds. Their hands and feet were clapped in irons before the ships departed. Their limbs were shackled hand and foot, 500 in each hole. The air, a fetid bouillabaisse of human sweat and human waste. Many just refused to eat. The speculum, it was a thing that forced open the mouth, performed its task. Some died slowly of bloody flux. Some jumped into the waves. 2 million skulls, 2 million souls lie on Atlantic's ocean floor. And this is a quote from a Nigerian poem. A dead body cannot receive a double punishment. If there's no cloth to cover it, there'll always be the sea. The third section of this is called Freedom Lost, Generations Lost. Generations of Africans were placed upon the block. Once proud who roamed, now property, were bought and sold in lots. They worked from dawn till after dusk for 6 days of each week. They lived in one-room cabins, slept on straw, little to eat. Some were given shoes to wear, most walked on their bare feet. White overseers controlled their days. Sleep was their sole release. For every day of every year, this life would be their destiny. As generations came and went, their lives remained the same, forced to live like animals with first but no last names. For property did not need names. Their value was their cost. Families were brought and sold with no account for human loss. Forbidden to learn to read or write, and X replaced identity. Time erased their culture, servitude, their dignity. And soon, the pride of brave heroes was struck from human memory. We robbed them of their... Let me just read you the discourse that follows that. Why should I repent? The sin isn't mine. Maybe not, but neither was English rule, or for that matter, the potato famine theirs. What's that supposed to mean? His question cut through the air. It was only the Africans who were removed from their homelands, carried across the Atlantic, and sold in the Americas an ocean away. It was only the Africans that were deemed not quite human property in a land called America, the land of the free. And when their 400-year-old diaspora was over, they were stuck in a land where they were no longer wanted, in a land that had separated them hundreds of years ago from their culture and their ancestry. See, the real difference is that your ancestors chose to cross the Atlantic, and when they arrived, their first sight of our land was the Statue of Liberty, a land filled with opportunities, a land free from harm. The first sight of our land that these Africans saw were the well-worn wooden platforms of slave seller stalls that were crudely erected at the water's edge. No opportunities awaited them there, only servitude and heartache and chains. America didn't always greet us with open arms either. There were once signs that read, "No dogs and Irishmen here." You're right, I replied, in the late 1800s, but sooner than later those signs disappeared. Yet those same racist signs, 100 years later, were still up and hanging for all folks of color all over the South, on fountains, on bathrooms, and in the windows of stores in an effort by whites to keep the blacks out. And do you know why these signs remained, I asked him. No, he replied, but I have a feeling you'll tell me. It's really quite simple. It's because our faces were white. While theirs were black and brown, ours were pure white, as snow in the mountains, and white is always white, its supremacy rarely doubted. But though black comes in all shades, from jet black to light brown, black's always black. There's no middle ground. So, what I was trying to say basically is we robbed them of their heritage. We robbed them of their rights. You know, I mean, I love when St. Patrick's Day comes up and people who would like to remember their Irish past went around yelling sometimes the only Gaelic they know, Pug Maho, which by the way means kiss my ass. But at least they have a tradition. Years later, they know where they come from, you know. Most Africans don't. And once again, we can't give them that back. They have to reclaim that themselves. themselves, and that's what they're doing with that. There are some things we can give them in repayment for what we took. There's also a part in here where it says, I didn't own slaves, well, neither did I. And to be quite honest, neither did my ancestors. But that doesn't exonerate me from turning my head. Yep.
I was going to mention in terms of records and accountability, that's what makes it quite difficult. I know my family has been able to go back 2 generations, but there's like a block because they didn't keep records of those kinds of things. And ironically, both my mother and my father's grandparents were both from Europe. But after that, we can't figure out where it was from there. So it's hard. It's hard.
I want to say one more thing. If anybody, in case nobody knows this, if you want to Google the greatest Russian poet of all times, you'll get Gregory Potemkin. I think it was Potemkin. Wait a minute. No, wait. Not Potemkin. Potemkin was the one that did villages all over, and the ones that the Russians just stole his bones and brought them back from Ukraine.
Yeah.
Wait, not Potemkin. What was his name? The greatest Russian poet. Oh, come on.
Solzhenitsyn,
Can't help but look it up.
No, he was the poet.
Tolstoy.
Who?
Tolstoy?
No,
An author, not
he
a
was an
poet.
author, yeah. I don't know why, but I just drew a blank.
Was he more recent?
No, he was mid-1800s.
Oh.
Pushkin?
Yes. And is there a picture there of him?
Yes.
Take a good close look. You recognize him?
Could be an ancestor.
Yes. He's part black.
Yeah, he does.
Wow.
But before, when I mentioned about ingrained racism, I was just checking. Back in history, the 3/5 compromise, we think, well, talk about inequality, and making a statement that blacks were lesser individuals, and it was written in some of the public documents.
Missouri Compromise.
Huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you happen to notice, I don't know whether it came up alive, but we just voted on, what is it, November 8th? And in 4 different states in the United States, on the ballot was getting rid of slavery.
Yeah. Still the most.
I'd like to know the states where it would be.
So we're kind of running it around about an hour and a half or longer. I just wanted to say, hey, thank you, Christopher, for coming today. He's going to be here for a while. But I just wanted to close off the live stream right now. And of course, we can stay and hang out and just be much more informal about it, and so on. So, but officially, I want to thank everybody for joining us live on the live stream on Facebook with Christopher Bogart over here and his book, This Conversation. He has also graciously gave to us 4 other titles of his other books that are going to be available here at the library if you want to check out his poetry here. So with that, thank you very much, Chris, for joining us. I wish everyone a happy New Year. Thank you.